This is Professor Sky, and welcome back to my class on Haiti, FCE 207. Now, listen, I like to have a little preamble before every class here online. This is not actually a college class. They are my lectures, but it's not the same thing. YouTube learning is passive learning, so you're not going to be able to get the feedback or the exact same lessons or the group work or any of that stuff. Okay, you don't actually have me as a teacher, but feel free to take the notes and to do the reading. I'll give you the reading so you can keep along. But just please don't confuse this with the actual class that I'm teaching. But I still want to share this information because I think it's important, based on the fact that these videos on my second channel are performing better than my music videos on my main channel. That's a sign maybe people care. Just as a brief reminder, some of the terminology I'm going to be using is offensive to our modern ears. It is historically accurate. Please see the previous videos on this topic. Also, this is a 200 level class, mostly for freshmen. So we're talking like, speaking of old term, first year students. So mostly 17, 18-year-olds from Western New York, from different boroughs of New York City. So just keep that in mind. I am not an expert on Haiti. I am a good communicator, I hope, of information and knowledge. Bill Nye is not a great scientist, but he's a great communicator of science. So I'm trying to communicate history, civilization, and all that. But I highly suggest if you want to actually become an expert, take a real class or read all of the books that I reference. So okay, I'm done with my little preamble here. I am indeed recording. Yes. All right. So let's get to my slideshow as I teach it. And here we go. Share. Let's see. Always got to have my old man energy here with my talking through technology as I use it. All right, let me just make sure this is what it looks like. All right. So today's class is the web of tension. And I like to talk about the sources that I'm using. The primary source here is Revolutions. As a matter of fact, the Revolutions podcast, the second episode is just called Web of Tensions. I thought about coming up with a different title, like a interconnected tenseness, or I came up with all sorts of other ways. But listen, this is largely based on the way that he frames it, with some added things from my expertise. Also, sources include the Liberté, Haiti Anthology, C.R.R. James's Black Jacobins, and Haiti, The Aftershocks of History. I highly suggest you add all three of these books to your library and you listen to the entire Revolutions podcast. Okay, so this is what a notebook should look like. These are my actual slides that I share with my students. So I have them take notes every day, and I actually grade them on the quality of their notes. Students and friends, I am Professor Sky. My name is perhaps known to you. I have undertaken to teach about Haiti. I want curiosity and a thirst for complex understanding to reign in this class. I am working to help that happen. Unite yourself, student, and learn with me for the same cause. Today we're going to do a review of X, Y, and Z, and we'll discuss the web of tension. And in my class, we're going to do some role playing. You can pretend to play along if you want here on YouTube. So what I did in the last class was I tried to make the complexity of the people who are in the area that is currently at this point called Haiti, that was called back then Saint-Domingue, the complexity. It's not just a question of black and white. There's also people who are, half black or half white, or we'll get more into the details. They are used, the nomenclature of colored at the time. That's how it's used. And that even within the whites and within the coloreds and within the black people, there's different divisions, different styles, different ways of life. And so I tried to flesh that out by personalizing, by coming up with imaginary people. I just named them X, Y, and Z because I didn't want to come up with fake names. So, we had Black X, who was stolen from his village, who loved his sister very much and would sing her songs. He really enjoys plantains, but not when they're too ripe. Chief of the tribe before stolen was Y. They're from wildly different parts of Africa, don't really share anything except for the fact that they were both thrown into a boat and they both work on the plantation of Big White X. And then Black Z was actually born enslaved on the island. These are all different kinds of experiences one might have. They're not just enslaved people. They are enslaved people with an entire human history, internal mind that goes back centuries. the three colored figures that I'm using. We have the law clerk has kind of a good, by the way, the word bourgeois, I use it quite a bit, bourgeoisie, that applies to people who are not working class, but are also not wealthy or not nobility. Actually, bourgeoisie can be wealthy, but the idea is they're not born noble. They have to work at it. So the bourgeoisie is often like, merchants or traders or people who are able to be very successful but don't have an official title. Then we have a manager, an actual manager of the enslaved people on the plantation of Big White X, who's actually the uncle of that law clerk. And then, of course, we have Colored Z, whose story is quite complicated because he is the son of the owner of the plantation, and Black Z, who you saw in the previous slide. He went off to France and had a whole life. Okay. And then we have the whites, the difference between the whites. There's big white plantation owner, son of a noble, born with a lot of money outside of Nantes, and goes and just gets richer and richer and richer and richer here on the island, on the French side of the island. Then you have the small white slave driver, someone who came to Haiti hoping to start his own plantation, but as many did, his went bust. When that went bust, it had to sell back to the bank as over 50% of the plantations in Haiti were owned by banks back in Europe. Okay, it was a very expensive thing, a very difficult thing. That's part of the reason why Bordeaux and Nantes are such beautiful cities, because again, they are drenched in blood. So he had to sell his bank, and actually, someone who works for that bank he had to sell it for was this lawyer who was just kind of a bourgeois white guy who lives on the island as well. Three very different experiences, three different ways of benefiting from whiteness on this island. All right. So that's the web of tension that those are the people who are all exist and who we're going to see how they all live in tension. And more importantly, why that tension was politically expedient, which is to say politically useful for the colonizers, the French themselves. So in class, I'm going to remind everybody that at the point of the revolution, 1791, there were 500,000 enslaved black people, 30,000 whites, and 30,000 coloreds. My class has 32 people, so I'm going to make the point that that would be as though four students were not enslaved in the class. Two of those not enslaved people were white, and two of them were colored. That's the amazing proportions. And I would try to ask them, how much injustice would you put up with if you outnumbered the person who is committing these atrocities against you? But of course, the question is, who really runs this? Oh, I have a little run the jewels thing. That'll be for my class. Who really runs everything? Is it the whites? Is it the coloreds? Is it the blacks? Is it the nobles? Who really runs it? It's the royal governor, everybody. We have to remember France. It is a colony. It is France that is interested. Who really runs this? As a little bit of review for you and for my class, who invited the royal governor? Who asked for France to be a part of this island? It was the pirates of the Caribbean, okay? It was the French pirates who wanted support, who wanted backup, who wanted the strength of the crown behind them, which then, so almost inadvertently, unintended consequences, unintended consequences kind of led to their being part of the French Empire. Who does this guy represent? He represents Louis XIV. All right. So that's the most important thing right now. We have to remember no matter what's happening, no matter who is tense or what, the people who are getting the richest off of Saint-Domingue is the French Empire. The people who are in charge of it is the French Empire. The people who make the decisions is the French Empire. That is who actually runs the island, even though they are thousands of miles away. Just as a reminder from the end of yesterday's class, I talked about the finance minister of Louis XIV, who had the belief that the power of a country comes from its wealth. If you're taking this class, I tell you this is going to be on the midterm, so you are going to have to know who Colbert is, because before Colbert, people had the thought that the strength of a country might come from the size of its army or from the size of its land. No, it comes from its wealth, which, as we will see, is related to the theories of mercantilism, which we'll talk about in a second. I talked about Louis XIV and the Black Code, Le Code Noir. I'm just going to go through this quickly because I talked about it in the last class, which provided some protections to enslaved people. Okay. And again, in case this is the first video that you are watching, every time it says slaves, it should say enslaved people. I'm usually quoting from a source, or I made a slide and I did not, I did not catch that I made that mistake 7 years ago when I first taught that class. Um, the lexical shift from slave to enslaved people had not been made. It is correct to call enslaved people because they are more than just slaves. They are people. But this is the way that it was written back then. Okay, so enslaved people cannot work on Sunday. If you are free and you are colored, you are free. If you are a freed enslaved person, you are free. These are things that they were ensuring in this black code. But of course, also they're always going to be baptized and negative things as well, and about the way they're to be treated, and that they are essentially to be treated like furniture. And I said this led to the cognitive dissonance that a black enslaved person is Catholic furniture. It is furniture with a soul. That doesn't make much sense. That was what it said. So it's the royal authority who actually runs everything. So everyone who we see over here who is interacting with each other and living on the island, it's the royal governor who's in charge and making sure that everything works out all the way back in France. For my class, I'm going to divide up the classroom to represent different groups. Okay, some of them will represent the royal authority, some will represent the whites, some will represent the colored, some will represent the blacks. Okay, it is a diverse class, but I'm not going to be dividing it according to the races of the people in the class. It'll just be random, just based on the geography of the class. In case you're wondering, like, you're not going to do that, and I'm not going to do that. Okay. So this is part of what I'm going to do, part of what you don't get by just watching this on YouTube is my students are going to be breaking into groups and talking with each other and working things through and helping each other out. And they're going to have little moments where they go, I didn't get this part at all. Did you get this part at all? And then they can talk about it and they can have that sense of community and they can kind of grow together and they can figure out when they're going to study together and they can talk about things that they like. And maybe they'll even get distracted and someone will be wearing a t-shirt that, says like the Giants, like, wow, I can't believe you root for the Giants when we're up here in Bill's territory. And then they can have a little conversation. I'll come by and say, are you talking about Haiti? Anyways, college is great. If you can afford it, it's great. Okay. So here's a question I'm going to be asking. All right. The goal of a colony was to enrich who? The entire economy of Saint-Domingue? Is that whatever? Yes. No, the entire colony of Saint-Domingue, the whites of Saint-Domingue, the French metropole, which means France itself, the colonizers, or all of the above. I'll give them some time to think about what was the point, what is the goal of a colony, who is supposed to get rich because of the colony. Now, here's what I expect. I expect everybody to just think, because, racism is terrible, they're just going to say, oh, it's just about the whites of Saint-Domingue. But that's not true. France doesn't care about them. France cares about itself. That's an empire doesn't care about anybody but itself. States always and only act in self-interest. Okay, that's just the nature. That's just the nature of states. As a reminder, when we say the metropole, sometimes I might say the hexagon because France is in the shape of a hexagon. Another way of putting it, it is the part of France that is in Europe. At different times, there have been parts of France in Africa. There are currently parts of France in the Pacific Islands. There are parts of France in South America. Like when I say parts of France, I mean like you go there, they vote for the president, they pay with euros. Okay, it's that much. But the parts of France that are in Europe, that's called the metropole or it's called the hexagon. All right. So the point of a colony is to enrich the hexagon. Whatever endangers the hexagon getting its bag is bad. The only point it serves, the only thing it does is help the hexagon. It has no other purpose. They don't care about the whites, colors, blacks, anybody. And a lot of it is based on this principle of mercantilism. I could have spent 20 minutes trying to find a better definition, but I just found Wikipedia. Listen, everybody, the skill of the 21st century is not the ability to find things, it's the ability to discern good from bad. Wikipedia is at this point more good than bad, but this kind of definition is just fine. A form of economic and nationalist economic policy that is designed to maximize exports and minimize imports. Seeks to maximize the accumulation of resources with a country, results in one-sided trade. Okay. I'm not going to talk about like the current American administration and whether or not this is a good idea. I might just throw that out there that like, hey, it's in, is that the point of these tariffs? Is that the point of what's going on here? Neutrally, one could ask. Okay. Neutrally, you look at it, it seems to make sense, right? Like a president, like a state, right? Any nation, their goal is to sell more than they buy. That way you get more money. It all goes back to the Colbert thoughts. Okay. So because of that, right. Yeah, this guy again. Sorry, I was too far. Right. If the power of a country comes from its wealth, then mercantilism has to be in place. You cannot import more than you export in that case. For that reason, did I just mute myself? No. For that reason, there was what was called the exclusive. Okay. What does the exclusive mean? Did I type it out here? Yeah. Okay. All imports from France, all exports to France. It's a closed market. You want to buy a shirt, it has to be okay. If you want to buy furniture, it has to be from France. You cannot buy it from Spain. You cannot buy it from England. You cannot buy it from an American colony. It has to come. Every single bit of food, every single bit of anything has to come from there. And if you make something, if you have a couple 100,000 pounds of sugar and the whole world wants sugar, it's one of the most valuable things in the world, you don't get to set a market. You don't get to say, hey, Spain, how much will you pay? Hey, France, how much will you pay? France sets the bill. So I'm going to say, okay, everyone, you role play. How do you feel about this? What is your opinion of this? Okay, we'll just kind of talk about it. The opinion was it sucks. It's terrible. It's terrible for the people of Saint-Domingue because they they are involved in this amazing market. They have this amazing profit. They're making this amazing profit, and they have to give the majority of the profit to a bunch of middlemen, to a bunch of managers in France, a bunch of banks, a bunch of government employees, to the state itself. They're doing all the work. Okay, well, they're not actually doing the work. The enslaved people are doing all the work, but they are the ones who are responsible for all this wealth. All three of these groups are together in creating this wealth. And the amount that any of them is benefiting from this is fractional compared to what France is getting from it. Now, of course, what does that lead to? What happens is 3/4 of everything that is exported to France gets re-exported to other countries, which means what? That 10,000, that 100,000, whatever, 1,000 pounds of sugar that you sell, France says they'll pay you $10 a pound. They keep 1 pound and they sell the rest for $30 a pound, and they just pocket all of that difference. Okay, this led to an unintended consequence. Hoo hoo! This leads to a huge black market, which makes sense because Spain and England don't want France to make all that money, right? If you're a if you're over there, I mean, Spain and England, so say you're over there on the Spanish side of the island, and you happen to talk to some plantation owners in Haiti, and they happen to slip into conversation that they can sell you 1,000 pounds of sugar for $15 a pound. Well, hey, we're paying 30 from France, and the plantation owner, they're getting paid 50% more. It all works out for everybody. Okay. This is the kind of thing that's going on all over the place. And it's fairly tense. Why is Big White X like George Washington? This is part of the reason I want to teach this class and why it's so important. Like I said in the first class, I almost named the course Haiti the Black Mirror because in so many cases, Haiti and America echo each other. Their history echo each other, except systemic racism on a global scale has meant that every time that something could go poorly for Haiti, it usually did due to the way it's been treated by its former colonizers and by the rest of the world. To the contrary, every time something could go well for America, it generally does. Okay, but why are these two folks similar? Now I'm going to give my class a couple minutes to think about this. Why are they similar? Oh dear God, do I hope they know? I hope at this point in the semester they know. They seem good, by the way. They seem good. Most of them have been keeping up with their homework, so I'm happy with my class. It's good. There's a couple reasons. One, they believe in, I think that says fair trade. What does that say? Free trade, right? Free trade and self-governance. That's what they want. And they're both slave owners who consider themselves slaves to colonial powers. Big White X isn't happy with France. Even he's there because of France, but he's not happy with France because, and this is, by the way, just so you know how I teach, this is nice because I'm teaching this lesson tomorrow. I now understand that I'm going to write up on the board the price of 100 pounds of sugar. Okay. So I'm actually going to do that. He wants to get $30 a pound. He doesn't want to get $10 a pound. And the fact he's not allowed to means he feels like he doesn't have freedom. He doesn't have self-governance. Okay. So that's one way that they're similar. And this is going to become more important because we're going to be studying the French Revolution before we get to the Haitian Revolution. And both of those revolutions are tied into the American Revolution because this is the time of revolution, because this is the time when everyone starts thinking, hey, maybe the old way doesn't make sense. Maybe kings and queens aren't chosen by God, but they're just people who have too much power and we need representation and liberty. A unified colony is a threat to the colonizer. That's a very important thing to understand. The more the people of Haiti, blacks, whites, coloreds, whites amongst themselves, coloreds amongst themselves, blacks amongst themselves, the more that they are all united, the more of a threat it is to France because they want all the money, not some of the money. They want that machine to just keep on churning it out. This is where it gets interesting because we cannot have some kind of unified vision of what it looked like. And what I like so much about the Mike Duncan podcast is how much he points this out. This is also on CRLR James, that it's not like the whites liked each other. The the small whites didn't like the big whites. The big whites, the small whites were like failed big whites. They all wanted to have all this power and they ended up just basically having really hard jobs. I'm not having sympathy for people who whip people for a living, but that's not a good living either. That's not a happy life either. That's running around in the sun and just practicing wanton cruelty, constantly trying to, it's a bad life and you don't get paid much and it's not really the life that you thought you had. You thought you'd be sitting in the house, but instead you're here in the field. They don't like each other. The big whites look down on the small whites as like uncultured fools. Class will always divide where race does not. This is why it's called the web of tension, because there's so much tension. There's so much, everyone is so unhappy with each other all the time. And this is good for France up until it's not. The royal governor says, I shall exploit this. This is an interesting point, is that racism itself was essentially introduced to the island. As Mike Duncan pointed out in the podcast, free enslaved people and coloreds could prosper. They really could. They really could. Like you could be successful. As I mentioned, you could be a former slave who then goes on to own slaves. This happened not a lot, but it happened enough that it definitely happened. So it's a thing that people in power often realize. Once the people you are oppressing understand the commonalities that they have with other oppressed people, they will start to fight against their oppressor. So, what needs to happen from the people who are controlling everything is they need to make sure there's a wedge between them. You cannot keep them together. Okay? So, if you are a small white, if you are a free colored person, or whatever, if you are a prosperous colored person, or if you're a freed enslaved person, if you're no longer enslaved, you might look around and say, hey, we have a pretty good island here. We could be doing a lot more. Why are we letting the French rip us off? So this is where racism needs to be invented and or inserted. We need to create division, or the French government needs to create division to ensure that their colony thrives and that the sugar keeps flowing. The spice has to keep flowing. So why would there be animosity between the small whites and coloreds? It's something that they need to build up. Much like animosity between the whites, there needs to be animosity between the small whites and the coloreds for the people in power to maintain their position. This is where I'll give some time for them to say, why is there animosity? And it makes sense because in a racialized system, every white person thinks on some level that they should be automatically by birth above people who are not as white as they are. And yet there are many prosperous people of mixed race. Of course, that's going to create animosity. It doesn't help. What did prosperous colored people call small whites? Do you remember? They called them black whites. Okay, this was the kind of tension that is building up and building up. Why does France want this division? Now, listen, this is what you do when you're a teacher. You repeat yourself a lot. If there's something you really want understood, you gotta repeat it a couple times, everybody. Why do they want this division? Because a unified colony is a threat to the colonizer. Web of tension. Okay. Whites and coloreds. Why are they up against each other? Well, this was the conspiracy, everybody. Not every conspiracy is wrong. We did land on the moon, but the world is not flat, but that's okay. But these aren't even conspiracy. These are just things that happened. The French exacerbated the injustices, gave the whites more power so that they felt more empowered to put down. And again, we're not even considering blacks here because most of them are enslaved. Okay. But when I say coloreds, I mean coloreds and free enslaved people. Okay. Non-whites on the island. The more you can split them apart, the easier it is to control things. So in 1764, it was declared that coloreds cannot have certain professions like lawyer or government jobs. This allows whites to feel superior, and this builds more resentment amongst the coloreds and allows them to be mad at the whites as opposed to, I don't know, unifying with the blacks. Who knows? Free enslaved people cannot take the name of their white patriarch. Okay, so you refused the name. 1777, no blacks in the hexagon. Free coloreds had to register. It used to be they could go back and forth. Remember colored Z? He was able to go and study in Paris. Now he'd have to register to be able to do that. And freed enslaved people couldn't go there at all. In 1779, colored people aren't allowed to wear silk or have formal titles. So all these things they were used to, they were taken away. And this built up more and more resentment and exacerbated, which is a fancy way of saying made worse this division between these two groups. You had to like keep your papers. You had to prove that you were free. In the middle of all this, you have folks like Saint-Marie, who actually explains the ridiculous racism, the faux scientific racism of this period of time, where he actually just writes out and divides up all of the people. I've been using some of these terms, even though they're barbaric, because that was how many different kinds of people there could be. Again, I'd like to remind you, not to be too kumbaya, but there is only one human race. Okay. Race is an invention. It's a social condition. It is not a biological condition. I mean, okay, I guess melanin and skin and whatever, certain whatever physiognomical traits, but it's invented. Race is invented. I'd like to remind you there was that teacher who was able to get all of her white students to hate each other by giving preference to blue-eyed students over green-eyed students. And all these all these white kids ended up hating each other because it's simple. You point out a difference and then you give preference to one group of the people who are different, and those two groups will hate each other forever. It's just how human beings work. Going off on a tangent. I'm going to bring up that point again, and I'll make sure to say her name again. I actually wrote her an email once, and she wrote me back. It's very nice. Okay, so this is how it's divided. to someone who is purely black or partially white. The ones that I would say are most important to understand is the term quadroon. That's where you have um, three parts white, one part black. So, one grandparent who's black and then the rest are white. Or mulatto, which is the essentially the term for a half black, half white person. So, anyways, these are just faux scientists, but these are the terms that come about, and these terms become important because once you say that people get preference depending on how white they are, proximity to whiteness is proximity to power, is distance from suffering, is distance from injustice. If I told you everybody who's watching this video whose last name starts starts with the letter B, you're all inferior, terrible people. I don't know. You might end up creating problems. So, the royal authority also, they had a thing where they had military service, where you had to serve in the colonial militia. And this was an interesting thing because this united the people against the royal governor. And I think it was mandatory, it was expensive, you had to buy your own gear, it was dangerous, and it was costly. So, I'm going to just have everyone discuss what that was like, how they felt about that. Eventually, the royal governor says, pay us and we can drop the military service. Well, they're not low on money, so they immediately just pay off and say, take my money. All right, we can go and do it. And then they change their mind because it was too expensive, it's too difficult. We're going to see this. When French troops arrive in Saint-Domingue, the first thing they do is die because of the climate and sickness and things like that. I mean, not all of them, but many of them. So they are unified in revolt, but just briefly. Eventually, the royal governor, the French crown, understands what to do. No military service for whites. Yes, military service for coloreds. Whew. Once again, am I going to put up the slide again? No, I didn't. The colonial, the colonial. One second. You know what? I need to pause the recording here. Just 1 second. Sorry, it was driving me crazy. Jane Elliott is the name of the teacher who did that experiment, who learned that if you divided a class of white kids between people who have green eyes and people who have blue eyes, and you gave preferential treatment, some of them got to go to recess and others didn't, depending on their eyes. These are all kids, these beautiful, innocent kids. Like within a couple weeks, you had people with green eyes saying, we don't trust those blue-eyed people. They're always trying to take our rights. They're always trying to take things away. So in this case, this is as predictable, where the French crown is just going to keep giving more and more and more to the whites, therefore enforcing racism, and for the time being, creating a benefit for the white inhabitants. It's interesting, I mean, we talk about military service. This also included helping out the American Revolution. If you don't know, this is really important, okay? The French helped the Americans during the American Revolution, not out of altruism, but because they wanted to really piss off the English, because the French and English have fought for a long time and they knew it would weaken the English. Little did they know that supporting the United States of America in its creation would end up costing them so much money that they would be open to their own revolution. So, this is the order of operations. French philosophy inspires the American Revolution. French soldiers help win the American Revolution. The American Revolution inspires the French Revolution. The French Revolution and the American Revolution and the French philosophy inspire the Haitian Revolution. Okay, that's how it's all going to go. And 545 colored soldiers from Haiti fought on the US. Okay, helped to beat those Brits, including, that's right, colored X. He was there. You see him? He's right there. You see, he's right there. Hey, let's go, buddy. Oh wait, should I make that slide like? I should. I should make that slide. I should make this like. I should change the color of it so it looks like that. Let's see, picture color, presets. This will be cool. Wait, not that. How do we recolor? Okay, recolor presets. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that looks good. Okay. How do I go back to share? Share. Okay. And I'm still recording. Yes. Okay. Yeah. All right. That looks better. Sorry. You get to see me make my slides in real time. A unified colony is a threat to the colonizer. So, what do we have? Okay, we have division amongst the whites. That's good. You have the bitter whites and the smug whites. You have division between the coloreds and the whites because the whites keep on getting preferential treatment and they still feel like the coloreds have too much power and too much respect. We have the royal authority who is now realizing the best thing to do is to use and support more of the coloreds. We're going to see that's going to pop up more because they have less power. They aspire to have power, so they have more interest in siding with the crown. And of course, all of them are separated from the enslaved black people because the enslaved black people have absolutely no power. Now, again, out of a room of 32 people, 28 of them are in this state of not having any power. Okay, there's all this discussion of freedom and rights and privileges. And meanwhile, who is making all this possible? Whose labor and blood is making this all possible? What do the coloreds and whites think of them? They don't. They don't. They just think of them, they think of them as Catholic furniture. So this makes sense that during this whole time, we also had petit marronnage. So I'm going to ask my students what that means. Marronnage means like escaping. I actually was upset because I thought that the insult maroon applied to marooned enslaved people, but it doesn't. It's just a misspelling of moron. What a maroon. Bugs Bunny used to say that. So petit marronnage and grand marronnage, simply it's temporary and permanent. Petit marronnage would be basically like running away from home, when an enslaved person would just sort of lose it and leave and usually come back. Sometimes they would even not be heavily punished, but usually they'd be heavily punished. Then grand marronnage is when the enslaved people would just get lost in the woods. And we're talking the 1700s here. It was possible to get lost in the woods, and there were woods and mountains. So there's thousands, 3,000 escaped enslaved people living in the mountains. Hey, I don't know how you feel about foreshadowing, but if there were a movie and I told you, hey, there's 3,000 escaped enslaved people living in the mountains, I think you can expect they're going to pop up again in the story. And this would often lead to exemplary torture. This was the belief. This was reason will prevail. This was the idea. What's the purpose of exemplary torture? To terrorize into hopelessness. Again, that's Mike Duncan's words, and that's the best way to put it. Now, that's not actually how it works. Torture doesn't work for anything besides just creating human misery. Okay? This is the name of this slide. I'll let you read it to yourself because it's just terrible. But it was intentionally cruel. The podcast went into great detail, salacious detail about like just horrible stuff with different body parts and crevices and just different forms of creative torture. The idea was to make the enslaved people hopeless and feel that they had to just do whatever was done. They had to just protect themselves. They had to just go along to get along, or else terrible things would happen. But that's not actually how the human spirit works. The human spirit works that often the more you try to push someone down, the more you try to snuff them out, the more the flame is going to come back and burn brighter, which is where we're going to have this first crucial pre-revolutionary figure, Makandal. Okay, here he is. There's the sculpture of Makandal in Haiti. Oh, by the way, sometimes people ask me, have I ever been to Haiti? No, I have not. I'd like to go someday. I've never been. It is currently a very difficult place to visit. Uh, the security question is always fairly high. So I hope to go someday. I will go someday, but that day probably is not when I have two very young children. So who is Makandal? Born sometime 1750s, and he was a maroon. The Grand Marronnage, he escaped. He was one of the 3,000. Okay, he was probably born in Africa. He was a great orator and a very charismatic person. He knew how to speak and how to talk to people, and people believed in him, believed he had some kind of, sorry, I have to check my baby monitor, kind of like a mystical power. He created networks, not just with other escaped enslaved people, but also with currently enslaved people. He was thinking. He had ideas. He organized raids to try to get people out, and he had a plan. Poison everyone and then kill everyone. Poison the well, poison the water of Cap Français, all right, the biggest city in Haiti at that time, and kill everybody. The plan was all ready, he was all set, but as often happens in a revolution, he got ratted out and he was burned alive. Again, burned alive. What happens when you commit spectacular torture and spectacular what happens when there's somebody who is a leader of an underground revolutionary movement and you kill them in a spectacular and cinematic way? They end up becoming more of a martyr than they already would have been. And that's what happened with Makandal. He's there. They burned him up. He burned to death. And they swear that he transformed into a fly and flew away, that he had this kind of magical, mystical power, that the flames couldn't stop him, that the whites couldn't stop him, that the French government couldn't stop him. Do you see why this character, why this person has a sculpture in the middle of the country? Now, around this time, we're still talking about what the blacks were up to, 1784, 1785. The royal governor was like, well, listen, we do have this code. Our king did set up this code. You have to give them the rights that we give them. Did they? Well, that's the thing. The whites and the coloreds knew that if you start giving anybody anything, they'll start asking for all sorts of things, like freedom and not being tortured to death. So there's an interesting legal case, which was mentioned and is in all the books when you study it. And it's really worth understanding because often the legal system determines who has the power. If a legal system does something that you know is wrong, then like they're serving somebody. So we're going to discuss this in class. We're going to talk about, this says Le Jeune, right? Yes, Le Jeune. He murdered 6 enslaved people who were completely innocent for no cause. He thought, and these were they worked in the coffee fields too, so not even the same amount of misery and pain. Just straight up murdered them, just for no reason. Absolutely forbidden by law, forbidden by the crown. Even though they were considered to be furniture, they were still considered you couldn't just kill them. He said they were trying to poison him. There was no evidence. And so it goes before the judge. And the judge has to figure out what to do. Do I hold up the Code Noir? Do I hold up what the French crown said? Or do I just do whatever the big whites on the island want me to do? Presumably, he's in league with the French crown. He's declared innocent. So how's everyone doing out here? How's everyone doing out here? If you're one of these 3 groups, one of these 4 groups, how you feeling? You got this guy who tries to free everybody and he gets killed and he transforms into a magical fly. Man, that's cool. You're just dying all the time, being murdered. And even if you have a little bit of space, if you're not the proper kind of white, you don't have power. If you're not the proper amount of white, you have increasingly less and less power. Things are just getting hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter, and the number of enslaved people just keeps going up. It was an absolute tinder keg ready to explode. In this context, this point is made that there was a book that was released in 1770 by Abbé Raynal. We'll come back to him later. One of 2 books that was mentioned on the podcast. I think I don't include the other one? Yeah. So one of them was how do I do this? Was The Avenger of the New World, where it's a story that takes place a couple hundred years in the future, and they're trying to piece things together, and there's a sculptor of somebody who helped to free the enslaved people. But that's less important than this book about the islands in the Caribbean, the 2 Indias. And this is what he wrote. Wait, I can't see it because my phone's in the way. 1 second. A courageous chief only is wanted. Where is he, the great man whom nature owes to her vexed, oppressed, and tormented children? Where is he? He will appear. Do not doubt it. He will come forth and raise the sacred standard of liberty. The venerable signal will gather around him the companions of his misfortune. More impetuous than the torrents, they will everywhere leave the indelible traces of their resentment. Everywhere people will bless the name of the hero who shall have reestablished the rights of the human race. Everywhere they will raise trophies to his honor. Let's go. That's what this was. This was writing about somebody is going to lead a great slave revolt. This is a book about somebody is going to show up. The first time in my class, we are now mentioning the name Toussaint. This is from C.L.R. James's book. Over and over again, Toussaint read this passage. A courageous chief only is wanted. Imagine you are a very intelligent, well-read, formerly enslaved person who is looking at this and thinking about the life that he has led, and you understand a hero is needed. So, what is a web of tension? I don't know. I don't think I'll have enough time, but I think you can make the argument that America has its own kind of web of tension. The only thing we seem to agree on is that we are divided. 80% of us think that we're basically incurably divided. We have different forces. I believe it is in the interest of the technological companies, especially the social media companies, but all these large companies and the media companies to keep us divided because it's easier to sell advertising. It's easier to keep us angry because a unified colony is the greatest threat to a colonizer. The more we're unified, the more the people who are actually oppressing us should be scared. I thought there was an enlightenment. I'm talking about the 1700s, everybody. I'm talking about the time of Diderot and Montesquieu and Rousseau. I'm talking about all the people who workshopped the ideas of freedom. I thought there was an enlightenment here. What is all of this stuff that we're studying? Well, there was an enlightenment over in France. There was. Diderot, one of the most important philosophers and writers of the 18th century, also helped to create the first ever encyclopedia, whose goal it was to spread knowledge to the common people, to stop having language kept from everybody. And he and other people who wrote the encyclopedias attacked slavery while there was still slavery in the French Empire. Let the colonies be destroyed rather than be the cause of so much evil, said the encyclopedia on its article on the slave trade. But such outbursts neither then nor now have carried weight, and wordy attacks against slavery drew sneers from observers which they were not altogether undeserved. The authors were compared to doctors who offered the patient nothing more than invectives against the disease which consumed him. Again, I'm not going to get too, sorry, my neighbor's having their lawn mowed. I'm not going to get too political as we are right now, but I think this is pretty interesting. I think this is a pretty good point to make that a lot of what we're doing online is essentially what the encyclopedias were doing. We are doctors saying this is a terrible disease, but we're not actually doing anything. But the Enlightenment will be part of what leads us to the French Revolution. And before we actually get to the Haitian Revolution, we need to tackle the French. It is going to have a great knock-on effect throughout the rest of the Haitian history. Your homework for Friday, my students' homework, and your homework if you want. I'm not entirely comfortable with this documentary. It's from the History Channel, and the History Channel is capable of good. It mostly uses its power to talk about aliens and stuff, but it can be good. So I am having my students watch, and you can watch along if you want, the French Revolution on History Channel. It's narrated by Mr. Gilmore. Rest in peace. It's a bit fluffy, way too much with kind of like salacious stories and then the head cut off and all that. But it's a good enough introduction. Then the next video that I'm doing is basically my overview of the French Revolution. That might not interest you, but I don't know. It's a pretty interesting moment in history. Okay? All right. So I'm going to stop the share. I'm recording in my daughter's room. You know, she's off in college now, so I guess this is space for me here. I certainly miss her. Hope it's going well where she is. All right. Well then, until next time, let me know what you thought of this lesson. How do I stop the recording?